recording for that to be available on our YouTube channel, and it will be available as of tomorrow. So that being said, I will hand it off to our first speaker, Dr. Howard, our Center Director, Dr. Howard Frank.
Thanks. Thank you, Lillian. You can share. Go ahead. Okay.
Yes. Right. Everyone should be seeing my screen.
Okay.
I'm not seeing it. I'm so sorry. 1 second.
Okay. Okay. Well, I know, well, first of all, thanks for joining us.
I'm sorry, we see the wrong screen, Lillian, with the notes.
Okay. I don't.
Can you all see the correct screen?
No.
Swap on the top where it says display settings, swap.
Yes, please bear with me. This is, I am having.
Yeah, swap presenter view and slideshow view.
1 second. I am so sorry about that. One second. All right, so just bear with me. Okay, we should be seeing the presentation.
It's not in presentation format. There we go.
Okay.
All good.
Thank
All right.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. I am Howard Frank, Director of the Perez Metropolitan Center. I was the designated leadoff hitter, and I'll preface my remarks by aging myself and saying that I'm sure I can speak for many South Floridians who were here for Andrew, that it is one of those days, little like for me, perhaps the Kennedy assassination or the fall of the Berlin Wall or 9/11. It's something that designates a very clear before and after. It was an event that really left an impact on us, and one that clearly started a new era. Go ahead, William. Next one. There's a term in the social sciences that is called a focusing event. And I think it's fair to say that in many regards, Andrew was a true focusing event. It fits these criteria. It happened suddenly. It was rare. It was large scale. And the people who make policy and the public experienced it all at the same time. And on that score, it became something that was very, very much an agenda setter. We are still living, I guess the phrase is that history sometimes casts a long shadow. And it's fair to say that Andrew has clearly cast a very, very long shadow to this very day. Go ahead, next. One thing I would say is it ended I guess the head in the sand approach to our environment. I know for many of us it was a shock that a natural disaster could cause multiple billions of dollars of damage, and we had to come to grips with the reality of facing a trifecta. We had relatively poor construction. We had building codes that were not doing the job in terms of really setting a standard to make us more resilient. And we had poor inspection. And those things combined were a witch's brew that led to the scenes that we saw in South Dade, where, you know, I can recall at the time people were saying they thought it was a war zone rather than the aftermath of a hurricane. And I guess Eric could add to this. We were lucky, not that the people in South Dade in any way, shape, or form were lucky, but let's say we were fortunate that the hurricane took a last-minute jog south, or else it would have gone through Biscayne Bay and hit a more populous area. So that, but we got a real we got a shock and a very important signal. Go ahead, next. So next thing that I would raise is resilience has a price tag. We can talk a lot about resilience and the ability to withstand man-made or natural shocks. And it's almost become a cliche, but the bottom line, literally and figuratively, is it has a price tag. So some of you might recall changing the building codes took us nearly a decade. And throughout the discussion of the codes and changing them, a lot of questions were raised about affordability. What is it going to do to the cost of housing to change the building codes so that they could withstand 130, 140 mile an hour winds? And I see this repeating after the tragedy in Surfside with the Champlain collapse, that we now deal with many angry condo and homeowner association members who are outraged and upset at being hit with thousands of dollars of repairs to their units now being mandated as a result of codes after Champlain. So again, this notion, yes, we all want to talk about being resilient, but when push comes to shove, resilience has a price tag. And I think that that is an important thing to consider, because yes, in the abstract, it makes sense, but we're in a region where there's relatively low wages and our cost of housing is high. And that may make resilience an increasingly difficult sell. I'd add as a footnote, I'm sure some of you watched TV a few days ago. It was last week, there was a near riot at Century Village in Pembroke Pines where the police had to be called because the owners there are being hit with a $200 a month increase in their maintenance to cover insurance costs. So, you know, to tell somebody on a fixed income that they're now having to pay another $200 for their insurance, it's tough to sell. And it raises a fundamental question: will we have a subset of owners and renters who are going to be forced from the region because it's just going to be too expensive to live here? Go ahead. So it raises questions, again, pre and post Andrew, is it truly fun in the sun? Well, one of the things the center looks at is population changes, and we know that there's out-migration from Dayton elsewhere, which again, consistent with what I just said. Are the housing costs here just becoming too high relative to the wages? I find it curious that you hear discussion of an insurance market. I think from Econ 101, they tell you that generally a market means a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers. I think there are many homeowners and condo owners in Florida, especially in this area, they're lucky if they can get a quote. And that's, you know, something is fundamentally running amok in insurance availability, and that relates, of course, to the growth of citizens, which Maria Elcheva will discuss later. And I guess that ultimately, Andrew sent us a lesson. You know, Mother Nature is a very uncompromising boss. It sends us signals, and there are things that are largely out of our control. So that is the intro and my intro. And I will say to you that again, we've had a lot of changes in our building codes. In the old days, you remember you could get an insurance policy from a company that you heard of, and you see it, you know, their jingles on TV. Can't do that anymore. It's hard. Andrew changed that. They basically left. Now we have a debate over whether there should be a citizens that is sort of Well, it used to be the insurer of last resort, and for many Floridians, it's the insurer of first resort. And then that takes us to what we'll discuss later, how insurance is, yes, it's a question that deals with both affordability and resilience. So now I will let Eric, I believe Eric is our next presenter, and we'll hear from Eric Salna of our Hurricane Center. Take it away.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So a pleasure to be a part of this webinar today, and certainly we thank everyone who's joined us here this afternoon. So I'm going to focus on the hurricane season, the forecast, and mitigation in the wall of wind, which is the big picture behind me. But I do want to mention right now at the start that the hurricane season was like a switch went off about a week or so ago. There have been systems now in the Atlantic, and there is now a new development, something that may be coming out of the Caribbean and moving into the Gulf of Mexico in the coming days. So this is the time of year that we have to, pay close attention to the tropics and the forecasts. So just want to give everyone a heads up. That is something now that is closer to home that we may have to watch here in the next few days. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and get my presentation up. All righty, so Liam, you can see my cover slide, Storms Are Brewing.
I am seeing your presentation slide deck, Eric. I'm not seeing the full screen version.
Okay, stand by. Let's see if I'll have to adjust it the same way. Okay, is that better?
No, I am still seeing the slide deck, Eric. Sorry about that.
Okay. So I'll stop share. And I'll try share again. Okay, how about now?
I am seeing the presenter version, so if you just do that swap that I had to do, we should be all good.
Okay,
Where it says display settings.
oops. Okay,
Just bear with us, everyone. It seems like we're having a bit of a tricky situation with the tech.
right, we'll go into this again. And okay, try this.
Okay, I see your screen.
Okay, you see the whole show.
Correct.
And then display settings. Let's see how we do this now.
So yeah, there. Mhm.
Okay, now do you see the full screen?
No, I don't.
Oh, huh. Go to slideshow, view show from beginning.
How about we switch the order of the presenters and maybe Eric, you send it to us and somebody else will share. It seems that you're experiencing problems, so. How about we proceed with Victoria Lerma, who will talk about our latest data from our annual hurricane poll. And in the meantime, Eric will share his presentation, and Eric, you will go after her. Sorry
Okay.
about that, everyone, but you won't we don't want you to miss any important information that is shown on screen. We'll just arrange it this way. Victoria, we can see your presentation, so please go ahead.
So you see the presentation and not the note view, correct? Perfect. I will start. Thank you everyone for joining today. I will be discussing the annual Hurricane Preparedness and Mitigation Poll results for the 2023 survey. As it is the 31st anniversary of Hurricane Andrew, I will give you some quick facts. This was a devastating Category 5 hurricane that made landfall on the southern part of Miami-Dade County on August 24, 1992. Wind speeds reached 165 miles per hour, resulting in hundreds of thousands being left homeless, as hundreds of thousands of homes were either destroyed or damaged. This also resulted in billions of dollars in damages, as well as the loss of life. From Hurricane Andrew, we have learned many valuable lessons, including the need to have a storm-specific building code, the need to better coordinate government response in the event of a natural disaster, and the need to better understand the hurricane preparedness of Floridians. Since Andrew, Florida has been hit by other major hurricanes, including Hurricane Opal in 1995, Hurricanes Charlie and Jean, 2004, Hurricane Wilma in 2005, Hurricane Irma in 2017, Hurricane Michael in 2018, and Hurricane Ian in 2022. So beginning in 2006, the Jorge M. Perez Metropolitan Center has conducted the annual Hurricane Preparedness and Mitigation Poll for the Florida Legislature. This is a telephone survey conducted among the coastal counties in Florida, 61 counties, during the first 2 weeks of the Atlantic hurricane season. Topics include awareness and experience, the insurance market, risk reduction, evacuations, and government measures for the mitigation of loss. In some years, our research focus leads us down certain paths, so we may add questions or change some of the questions. For instance, in 2023, we removed the COVID-19 specific questions and added 2 new questions. One was to gauge how have homeowners responded to increasing homeowners insurance rates? And the second one was, which level of government should be responsible for reimbursing costs associated with hurricane damages? Although some questions may change, the majority of questions have remained the same, and rest assured, this is the longest running survey of Florida resident attitudes towards hurricane preparedness. So as we can see, the 2023 survey had 808 responses spread through the coastal counties in Florida, with a concentration in the most populous coastal counties. In fact, 3 in 10 responses came from the 3 South Florida counties of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. One data limitation of our survey is that we have oversampled the elderly population, 65 and over, and we have also oversampled those who had graduate or professional degrees. Interestingly, 2 in 10 respondents identified as being Hispanic or Latino, and slightly less than 1/3 of respondents had a household income of less than $50,000. In terms of hurricane experience, 1 in 10 respondents indicated they never experienced either a tropical storm or a hurricane, but 3 in 10 specifically stated they experienced a Category 3 hurricane. So here we see the hurricane effect and culture of preparedness. What we see is that for information access, in other words, do Floridians feel they have all the information they need to prepare their homes in the event of a hurricane. This does not vary greatly throughout the years. Where we see interesting trends are in the percentage of Floridians who indicated they had a plan of action for a hurricane and those who felt particularly vulnerable to hurricanes. What we see is these boxes that you view are the results of the survey in the aftermath or the following year to a major hurricane. And the trends that we identified were that in years where there are no hurricanes or no major hurricanes, the percentage of those who had a plan of action, as well as those who felt vulnerable to a hurricane, begin to fall off. Then we see upticks in the aftermath of major hurricanes. This also happened during COVID-19. There weren't hurricanes in a few years. They had other concerns, so plans of action and perceptions of vulnerability fell. However, in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, we're starting to see these percentages are ticking up again. COVID-19, our survey showed, we also surveyed during COVID, that this pandemic really impacted families, their economies, etc., and how they were able to prepare for hurricanes. It also impacted the willingness of Floridians to evacuate if ordered by emergency management officials. We see that these percentages fell off during the pandemic, but began picking up again after Hurricane Ian and mass vaccinations. Our survey, again, focused on hurricane preparedness, and in order to understand the effect before and after the pandemic, we looked at 2019, right before the pandemic, and 2023, right after mass vaccinations, as well as Hurricane Ian. And what we are seeing when we compare these 2 years is that about 1/3 stated their home is already prepared and they could secure it within a few hours. We saw that 3 in 10 stated they would begin to prepare their home when a hurricane watch is issued. We also asked respondents to evaluate the preparedness of their home on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least prepared and 5 being the most prepared. And we saw that in both those years, the median score was 4 out of 5. We also asked their reasonable to very high confidence levels that new developments and land use planning take into account flood risks, hurricane risks, wind risk, and we saw that these decreased from 2019 to 2023. The only one that increased is that building codes are as strict as they should be to mitigate loss, and this is something that Dr. Ilcheva will be discussing further. Our survey asked about hurricane damages as well as homeowners insurance. 258 respondents stated that they lived in a home physically damaged by a hurricane. And of these, 31.2% stated that these damages were of $50,000 and above. Interestingly, in terms of homeowners insurance, over 1 in 5 homeowners would consider dropping their insurance if their mortgages were paid off. This is not surprising given how 50.8% stated their homeowners insurance rates increased significantly from the previous year. In 2023, we added 2 new questions. The first one being, if a major hurricane were to impact your area, which level of government should reimburse your costs? Now, keep in mind, percentages do exceed 100, as they could select more than one option. And most people stated the federal government should be responsible. We also asked what increases, this is only to homeowners, did you take as a result of these homeowners increases? How did you react? The majority stated they did nothing, they just paid the higher rate, but others changed insurance providers, etc. Our survey also asked about the role of government in combating sea level rise. In 2023, we added a new option that the government should consult scientists and implement their recommendations. And this was the most popular option, with 53.1% selecting it. Again, percentages can exceed 100 as they could select more than one option. We also asked, all right, for those of you who believe the government should take action and sea level rise is happening, how should they fund these initiatives? And 45.3% stated that we should either increase income taxes, property taxes, or both. There was a high percentage of those who stated other, and this included things like cut wasteful spending or increase other types of taxes, like sales tax, corporate taxes, and some even said charge the insurance companies. Our survey also asked, when you purchased your home, what were the top 3 characteristics that influenced your decision? We compared 2019, 2022, and 2023 to have a little bit of a trend analysis. And what we see is that in these 3 years, neighborhood, price, and school are the top options. If you look at insurance rates, not even 5% are listing that as one of their top 3 characteristics when purchasing their home. So are Floridians better prepared in the event of a hurricane now than before the COVID-19 pandemic? The answer is, it depends. So you see here, we are using a traffic signal analogy where green would mean we are at or above pre-pandemic levels. Yellow would mean we are below pre-pandemic levels, but above 2022, the previous year. And red would mean we're just doing worse than in 2022, which luckily we did not have that. We view preparation in terms of a combination of factors. Do they have the information they need? Do they have a plan of action? Do they understand the risk? Would they evacuate if ordered? Would they prepare their home? And for only homeowners, have they dropped their homeowners insurance or do they have homeowners insurance? Since these are self-evaluations, it is important to ask, do homeowners and renters, respondents in general, have a frame of reference? Have they experienced a hurricane or tropical storm? The answer is yes. The majority have, and this is at the pre-pandemic levels. Do they have the information they need to prepare their homes? And the majority do, and this is at pre-pandemic levels again. Where we see improvement, but not being at pre-pandemic levels, is do they have a plan of action in the event of a hurricane? And do they feel vulnerable to a hurricane and associated damages? Now, interestingly, on a positive note, about 1/3 would evacuate if ordered. However, this is Florida, and we have to take it with a grain of salt. 20% stated that they would probably never evacuate. So this means that about 1 in 5 Floridians would continue to risk their lives by not evacuating if ordered. Now, in terms of preparedness, many would begin to prepare their home either when a hurricane watch is issued or sooner. Their home is prepared and could be secured within a few hours. In terms of median ratings of preparedness on a 1 to 5 scale, in all 3 years, we see 4 out of 5. Finally, this is only for homeowners. Do they have homeowners insurance? And we see a large percentage who stated they recently dropped their insurance or simply they do not have homeowners insurance. And this is 12.3%. This can strain government resources in the aftermath of a hurricane if, in actuality, such a large percentage of homeowners in Florida do not have homeowners insurance. And with that, I will transition to my colleague, Dr. Maria Ilcheva. Thank you.
Actually, since we switched the order, I wonder if we can go back to Eric.
Sorry.
Eric, do you want to try again?
I could certainly try again, and I'm sending over a link that Lillian could then show it if this doesn't work. So
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Are you seeing that on the screen or not this time?
No, we see nothing except you.
Okay, all right. All right, why don't you go right ahead then, and I guess I'll close it out in the speaking order.
Excellent. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Ilcheva. I'm the Associate Director and researcher at the Perez Metropolitan Center. The focus of my presentation is one particular topic that certainly garnered a lot of attention in recent years, not just in recent months. And that's the insurance crisis. Let's put it bluntly. So I will give you some of the data, and I will raise some questions that you may have seen raised. But I want to preface by saying that the purpose of this presentation is not to advocate for or against a particular player in the insurance market. And the players in the insurance markets are many, right? It's not just the insurance companies, it's also our political leaders, it's consumers, certainly, it's the real estate sector, the regulators. So what I'm trying to present is a balanced approach that illuminates some of the information that we have based on representative data on reputable sources, and then raise the questions of what is the future of Florida's homeowners insurance, given the challenges in our state. So I will start sharing my screen now, and I will ask someone from my staff to confirm that we're seeing the presentation screen. Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. So I want to first highlight that despite the shocking images of glitzy downtown Miami, Tampa, or Jacksonville streets submerged in water, and the dire predictions about the increasing vulnerability of infrastructure and communities, Florida continues to attract new residents. Hand in hand with the growth management challenges that emerge as a result of that, Florida's urban coastal areas and the respective communities are now faced with this added crisis, a crumbling homeowner insurance market that is unable to or reluctant to continue serving as a safety net to homeowners. Households in Florida, which by the way is now the third most populous state in the United States, have been grappling for some time with this property insurance crisis that is making homeownership even more unaffordable for many. People, as you heard from my colleague Victoria Lerma, may not consider homeowners insurance at the time of purchase their home, certainly not at the level they think about neighborhoods or schools. But it's becoming it's becoming an issue later on as insurance rates keep increasing. After at least 6 insurers, I'm sure you've heard of that, went insolvent in Florida last year. Last month in July, Farmers became the latest to pull out of the Florida market. And in their statement, they said that the decision was based on risk exposure in our state. So how did we get here? We are now feeling the consequences of the changes that have occurred over the last 3 decades, precipitating the current crisis. You heard from Dr. Frank earlier that certainly we've made significant changes, and Victoria also alluded to building code updates, to more code enforcement, more attention certainly being paid to our vulnerability and risk. But we are still in a crisis. We have grown substantially and mostly in the coastal areas where the higher density also creates other challenges to growth like transportation, gridlocks, flooding, infrastructure strain, and evacuation issues. The aging housing stock, rise of construction costs, and income stagnations are also barriers to home hardening and other mitigation efforts. And of course, as a result of these infrastructure, population, and economic challenges, coupled with sea level rise and climate change, we also have increased risk and vulnerability. And finally, it is worth mentioning and even emphasizing the reluctance of regulators, legislators, and consecutive executive leaders to allow rate increases is making it both harder and costlier to obtain home insurance as the large insurers pull out of the state. So in the next few slides, I will give you some of the evidence for these factors. Again, this is a balanced view without any attempt to point fingers, but instead acknowledge that the insurance crisis has been looming for some time because of the compounding effect of these factors. First, with regards to Florida, Florida's growth, our population has grown by almost 9 million in the past 3 decades. So in our tri-county area, the largest growth was in the smallest county, Palm Beach, in which the population increased by about 74% over the 1990-2021 period. And in Miami-Dade, the population growth was 38%, Broward 54%, as you see from this chart. This increase has been concentrated in the coastal areas across the state, as evident from the density increases over the same period. The increase in density in Broward was 54%, from about 1,000 persons per square mile to over 1,600. There was a 74% increase in density in Palm Beach and 38% in Miami-Dade. Note here something interesting for those of us who lived or have lived in Miami-Dade County. We often talk about density and the effects it has on mobility and other considerations, but in fact Broward County is much denser in terms of population. At the same time, median household income declined slightly over the 3 decades in real dollars, meaning the value of the dollar adjusted for inflation. While there was a significant increase from 2010 to 2021, when we compared 1990 incomes to 2021 incomes, there was a 3% decline in Broward and Palm Beach and a 1% decline in Miami-Dade. This obviously creates problems in terms of resources, but it also creates other problems in terms of are we able to keep our population stable? Are we able to keep our residents in our location and earning wages that can afford them a good quality of life? To stay on point, I won't go into the housing costs because this could be a topic for not one, but multiple webinars. But we all know the significant increases we experienced both in the early 2000s and more recently. Insurance costs, though, which I want to focus on, have jumped significantly just over the last decade. And this is data from the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation, which compiles all the premiums written and all the policies from the various insurance companies. And based on that, we calculated these averages. So there has been a 79% increase in average home insurance premiums from 2010 to 2022. At the same time, according to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, average wind claim costs have increased by 300% over the same period. So we already see the mismatch between rising insurance rates and rising insurance claims, which creates this this phrase or the need for us to think about what is actuarially sound. How do we pay so that we have a competitive market, while at the same time making it accessible to most Florida homeowners. The rising costs for hurricane-related damages have been kept at bay by both regulation and the introduction of a state-backed insurance company. Citizens, the state-backed insurance company that I mentioned, was officially launched in 2002 with the statute citing compelling public interest and a public purpose to assist in assuring that property in the state is insured and that it is insured at affordable rates. This is the citizen statute. So it's a very clear purpose. As Dr. Frank mentioned, it was created to be the insurer of last resort. Although, as you see from this graph, it has often been, it hasn't been used as such. over the 2 decades of its existence, there have been multiple depopulation attempts. What the term means that attempts to move policyholders out of Citizens and back into the private insurance market. But there have also been insurance company pullouts that caused fluctuations in the number of Citizens policies. Citizens held at its inception fewer than 600 policies. So that's not shown in the graph. I just wanted to mention that for perspective. In 2002, again at its inception, approximately 82% of Citizens insurance coverage exposure was in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties, right? Exposure is not based on policies. It's based on the value of the properties insured in that respective company. The Citizens number of policies increased to 1.3 million in 2006 and stayed over the million mark until 2014, when the state insurer had only about 660,000 policies. The lowest number, as you see in this graph, was in 2018, when it had about just over 427,000. From its inception, again, Citizens captured a significant share of the insurance market, starting with 14% of all policies in 2003 and 13% of insured value in Florida. I want to remind you that the number of policies, again, is different from exposure because of the fact that the property Citizens insurers are mostly in the coastal counties where the risk is higher. So the risk for Citizens, given that it's the insurer of last resort for many who can't find affordable policies in the private market, may create some challenges down the road with claims that the company cannot cover. As a result of increased risk and rate regulation, private insurers have been unwilling to stay in the state. There are also a number of smaller companies, further compounding that issue, with these companies becoming insolvent, which led to the bloating of Citizens again in recent years. A devastating storm or a series of smaller storms even that hit in the right place, right, in quotation marks, but places where which have high home values, which have high vulnerability, could cause a deficit in one or more of the Citizens' accounts, leaving it without enough money to pay all claims. What happens in that case, since this is the state-backed insurer, Florida law requires Citizens to charge a series of assessments until the deficit is paid. So in other words, Citizens policyholders, even though they may not pay the same rates as a private insurer would offer them, they're still liable to pay any losses incurred by the company down the road if if a storm causes the claims to be larger than what's in Citizens' accounts. And a Citizens policyholder assessment in the worst case scenario can be up to 45% of their premium. So just to keep you on alert about that, many people have said, well, Citizens, actually you can hear people on both sides of the aisle. Some say that Citizens should pull out completely, others say it should expand, but these factors, these considerations need to be taken into account. How will the company remain solvent is by making all Citizens policyholders, as well as those who hold policies with private market companies, to pay these assessments. So why are some private insurers unwilling to write policies for Floridians? Two often mentioned reasons are rate regulation, which prevents insurers from offering what they consider actuarially sound market rates. And the second reason is litigation. You might actually have heard on the news, and it's always an issue early on in the year and in the summer months when insurance companies submit their requests for rate increases to the Office of Insurance Regulation. And it is in very rare occasions that the rate requests, the rate increase requests are met. The insurer typically asks companies to revise them. Even with the state insurer, Citizens has currently put a request for a 12% increase, but regulators have already responded that they need to revise this request, and most likely, even though they will approve some rate increase, it won't be in the double digits. Historically, regulators have been quite reluctant to approve double-digit increases with regards to Citizens, although they do allow it with many private insurance companies. I wanted to look in this slide at the profits of the homeowner insurance industry to gauge the validity of this rate soundness claim, that if companies are not allowed to increase their rates, it doesn't make sense basically to stay in the state because they will be operating at a loss from the perspective of underwriting profits. So I also want to mention that the data here is for the whole group of homeowner insurance companies, as reported by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So it is aggregate data and certainly doesn't speak to the individual experiences of companies within that group. And for perspective, for context, in the table, I'm showing you the private passenger auto policy profits. Notice first in the chart, you can see the fluctuation of homeowner insurance profits, and these, of course, are related to years of high claims. Notice the dip, the negative figure in 2004. Total insurance claims from the 2004 hurricanes were larger than the amount of claims resulting from Hurricane Andrew, adjusted for inflation, of course. Over the 21-year period from 2000 to 2021, the average profit as a percent of premiums earned for homeowners insurance was 1.9%. After the sector was able to make up the losses of the 2000-2010 period in the subsequent decade. For auto policies, the profit was negative 0.6%. And by the way, in 2023, the reason why I picked private auto policies for comparison is because the homeowners multiple period line accounts for 15.2% of direct premiums written, compared to 28.8% of private passenger auto. So private passenger auto policies are a larger proportion of overall insurance policies written in terms of dollar value. There were about 22 billion in 2021, compared to 11.4 billion for the homeowners multiple peril line accounts. For auto policies, the profit again was negative 0.6%. Aggregate numbers, individual companies may have different experiences, and that may explain individual decisions to stop writing altogether or to reduce the number of policies they hold, even if they choose to stay in the state. But over the 21-year period, that insurance line account is in the positive, whereas the private passenger auto account is in the negative, slightly below minus 1%. So a few final words before we proceed to the last speaker. And I'm raising again important questions that we've been pondering for decades, certainly since Andrew, but I venture to say there were people have been asking them even prior to that, as hurricane risk and the danger of hurricanes is certainly not new to the state. Is our growth sustainable? And what I mean by that is both in terms of population, as well as housing and construction, and where we build and how we build. And the second important question is, how do we reconcile this rising risk? I think there is more acknowledgement that we are becoming more vulnerable as a result of these changes, as a result of both population and demographic changes, but also as a result of the environmental risks that are increasing. So how do we reconcile that risk with affordability, with the need for us to have a population that can afford to live here and not to pay to be excessively cost burdened in relation to their housing costs? A few some food for thought pieces. Again, we need to be very cognizant that of the risks and the costs. And I'm hoping that in the future, as we keep collecting this annual data in the poll, we will see flood risk and hurricane insurance costs become more important as people consider the places where they choose to live. That's also related to growth management, and that's not so much on homeowners, but more on our decision makers. I know there's a tension between the need for revenue collection from taxes, but we also need to acknowledge that unbridled growth and growth in the wrong places, which are vulnerable to flooding or to extreme damage from wind, may not be beneficial in the long run. My third point is related to acknowledging that affordability, and we certainly speak on that point in our housing studies, is related to economic development. It's relative to economic development. How much we can afford to pay for our housing and other expenses, and how much we can afford to pay for insurance, that is commensurate with the risk homeowners have, is related to incomes. So income stagnation and income declines are something that we need to pay close attention to, and from an economic development perspective, seek economic solutions to these affordability issues. Fourth, it was already mentioned by the previous speakers, upgrading our building codes continuously to what the scientists are saying the risks of the future, and enforcing them are part of this equation to becoming more resilient and sustainable. Mitigation strategies, these are related to, and Eric will allude to some of these at the state level as resources that might be available to homeowners to engage with them. But it should be emphasized that it's not the responsibility of government alone. It's not the responsibility of the insurance industry alone. Homeowners need to be aware of the risk, and if they have the resources or with government support where available, or with simply dedicating funding to home hardening and other mitigation strategies to precipitate any huge potential losses, both in terms of property and life. And finally, this will take a kind of both a short-term view as well as long-term planning and strategies. The environment is changing, our population is changing, our coastline is changing almost on a monthly or annual basis, but we need to look further in the future and make these hard decisions, at least lay the foundation for these hard decisions now, if we are to remain as a state that is evolving in a positive manner, and that is still attractive both for local residents as well as for those who want to visit us or relocate to our state. Finally, the presentation will be available on our website. All of you participating here as a post meeting email, you will receive both the link to our YouTube webinar, to the webinar on YouTube, as well as the presentation. So thank you all, and I look forward to any questions that I might have prompted.
I think we're ready for you, Eric. So just give me a second and please confirm that you're able to see the presentation as well as its full screen version.
Yes.
Thank you all. Go ahead, Eric. You have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead, advance to the next slide. You can hear me loud and clear as well. All right, so there's my contact information as well. And of course, all our, you can continue to monitor all our research and everything we do at the Extreme Events Institute through all our social media channels. Next slide. All right, we talked about Hurricane Andrew earlier. Great retrospective in that way. And as was touched upon briefly, we were very lucky way back then when it hit South Dade County and missed the major metropolitan population center. And in terms of hurricanes, they're all different sizes. Certainly Andrew was devastating, but it was a smaller size. So that helped in terms of its overall damage swath, even though where it did make damage in that eye wall, it was devastating. Next slide. So just a few thoughts that I have when you look at the legacy, and there's many ways to look at the legacy of Andrew, and some of those have already been touched upon now. Certainly since then, we've, I think we see improved preparedness. Andrew really woke up Florida and became a leader in all these areas, emergency management, and then the creation of us, the International Hurricane Research Center under the Extreme Events Institute, which then led to the Wall of Wind program, where the research that we do, and I'll chat about in just a moment, and of course, stronger building codes, which we know work. And I have stopped, you know, a lot of this messaging is now, you know, we have to stop the spin cycle of damage, rebuild, damage, rebuild. We can't rebuild the same way, and in some cases, the same place, because every event is so expensive, billions of dollars. So the spin cycle has to change in terms of how we can improve in all these areas. Next slide. So just briefly then, another way to talk about the whole issue of the hurricane, if you go to our webpage, homepage of the Extreme Events Institute, is the risk equation, where we talk about the hazard and then exposure and vulnerabilities. And of course, the insurance industry knows about that as well. And Dr. Olson is the director of the Extreme Events Institute, is in the leader when it comes to this kind of discussion and with the hazard with the risk equation. Next slide. So with that in mind, we've learned that, just kind of a quick open-ended question, are there natural disasters occurring around the world? Next slide. You would think the natural answer would be yes, but it's no. And so what do I mean by that? Well, with related to the hazard risk equation and so on, there are no natural disasters, there are only natural hazards. So it's because where we've built our cities and towns, we've created our exposures and vulnerabilities. Next slide. So case in point, Florida, third most populous state in the country, and we are the hurricane capital of the country. Next slide. So is that a collision waiting to happen? And it is, and it has been since Andrew. You know, these hurricanes for Florida, they're not a one-off, right? Andrew, then Irma, then Michael, then Ian, right? And that's because of where we live in Florida. So looking at Hurricane Irma, next slide, where we have made improvements with the building code, an example of the picture down in the Florida Keys. You can see older construction did not do well, newer construction did. And Hurricane Michael, next slide, same kind of picture. Old construction, weaker building codes did not do well. Newer construction certainly did. Next slide. And also some of our research here at the Extreme Events Institute is the Florida Public Hurricane Loss Model. And Dr. Hamid and his team, they run tracks to determine the damage cost of a landfalling hurricane. And on the left-hand slide, you see the track, which is what the model says would be a worst-case track, which we hope we never see, from south to north, going through Miami-Dade, Broward, into Palm Beach counties with the eye wall inland. And for a while, Irma had that track on the table, but it shifted to the west and Thank goodness we didn't see that. Next slide. So the forecast for the hurricane season moving forward, it was updated by NOAA here in the month of August, and they bumped up the numbers a bit, which was not what we wanted to see. And here's why. Next slide. There's a couple of things going on. First of all, you may have already heard El Nino, and that's the very warm waters now that have developed in the Pacific Ocean. Next slide. And that would typically lower the numbers of a hurricane season. However, on our side of the world, in the Atlantic, we have extremely warm water, sea surface temperatures. And so those sea surface temperatures, it's a tug of war. Which one will win? El Nino, which can bring wind shear and lower the numbers, or the warm waters? And NOAA thought that, you know, so far that warm water may win the tug of war a bit. So that's why they increased the numbers. There's the names. We've gone through Harold, and we're keeping a close eye on systems that are currently out there right now. Next slide. So the peak of the hurricane season, we know, as we get into September, but we cannot forget about October here in the state of Florida and South Florida, because historically we've been very active in October. Next slide. So where are they going to go? Well, steering currents, and we're hoping they'll be such that they'll make them spin and curve to the northeast and miss the country. Current systems in the Atlantic out there now are doing that, and we'll have to wait and see week by week how those steering currents may change. So as far as the forecast cone, you know, the National Hurricane Center certainly shows the cone. The local media shows the cone, but it can be misunderstood. And in terms of how it's created and what it shows and does not show us. Next slide.
I'm not sure, but I think so.
So we know the cone is created by an ensemble of
this is new.
hurricane
We're gonna be
models,
working
track
on it.
models, and there's not one best model that would take the track. So we would just see a skinny black line if that was the case. All they can do is encircle those models to create the cone. Next slide. But as the National Hurricane Center reminds us, the cone only shows us location, but not the hazards. We need to all focus on the hazards. Next slide. So when there's a system out there in the National Hurricane Center, you go to their webpage, and you will see a variety of extra graphics besides the cone that are more focused on the hazards that could be affecting our area. This is what we need to all focus on. Next slide. And then from the National Hurricane Center website, us here in South Florida, you want to go to the National Weather Service Miami office, which is located right on here in the FIU campus, where they will have even more specific graphics on how your South Florida will be affected by that tropical system in more detail. And they have a big program called the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program. We are a part of it here at FIU. And if you're not an ambassador and you're doing preparedness work in this field, go to the webpage, check it out, and you can apply. So when it comes to hurricanes and what the threats are, certainly there's wind, but when it comes to fatalities, it's the water, rain and storm surge is the majority of it. And of course, this is what it looks like and what storm surge can look like over South Florida, A1A. And because of the danger of storm surge, several years ago, the National Hurricane Center came out with a new terminology, storm surge watch and warning. And for all of us to get used to this newer terminology, we've all had hurricane watch and warning for years, but storm surge watch and warning. And the Hurricane Center says they don't take this watch and warning lightly. If they issue a storm surge watch or a storm surge warning for our coast, they are serious. So that means we need to then take that storm surge threat serious. Next slide. And so that means if you're asked to evacuate, you should do so. Next slide. So everyone, no matter where you live here in South Florida, and for others who may be watching this webinar from other communities, know your evacuation zone and what that plan is going to be if you do evacuate. Next slide. Flooding is certainly a big issue. National Weather Service says when flooded, turn around, don't drown. And let's go back to April. This is Broward Boulevard, downtown Fort Lauderdale. An incredible amount of rain fell in such a short amount of time, 25 inches within 6 hours, unprecedented. And we saw the flood effects from that. Next slide. The bullseye near the airport in Hollywood Beach, and it led to the airport closing down. Unprecedented for the major airport to shut down because of flooding, but it does show the danger of flooding. It wasn't a hurricane, but it reminded us a slow-moving storm can bring a lot of water to South Florida. Next slide. So certainly flood insurance, everyone should consider it. And if your home and family budget can afford it, to get flood insurance, and look into it and talk it over with your insurance agent. Next slide. So with regards to all of this, we've learned about mitigation and the insurance issues. And so we have the wall of wind, where we're trying to be now that research piece to advance not only wind engineering, but enhance building codes and all of the issues that you've heard about already today. Next slide. So this is just a short video here. There's no audio on it, so I'll just voice over it. And again, it's been a video that has really helped us, as a demonstration video, illustrate, the importance of mitigation, and that it works, and that, simple things, not so simple, but shutters and roof tie downs are the kinds of things that can really help keep a roof on a home and protecting all our window openings.
Just gonna skip over this one, Eric. It looks like it's not loading.
Okay. So a lot of that and the work of the wall of wind shows that, there's a lot of forces acting on a home, positive and negative. So that's why we say all openings should be closed, should be shuttered. And next slide. And including one last measure of safety, if a storm should be making landfall in your community or here in South Florida, is close all those interior doors and all the bedrooms, closets, bathrooms, and then go to your safe room, the center part, the most safest part of your home. Next slide. And we do have a big vision for a future wall of wind facility, testing facility, through the National Science Foundation. We go to 160 miles per hour approximately now with the current wall of wind, but a new vision, it has a new facility where we may go up to 200 miles an hour and have a large water tank in front of the fans to then, we can now add in the hazards of erosion and storm surge. This is an ongoing project right now, and the prototype is being designed. And in the next couple of years, we hope to see a prototype before the actual new facility would be built. So stay tuned, we'll keep you posted. So here in Florida, of course, and what we're used to, we go in our attics, we have our hurricane straps, and this is something that certainly goes a long way to holding our roof on our home. And they're just so invaluable to have in construction. Next slide. Garage door failures, we learned that from Andrew, but for any hurricane, because it is the largest opening in any home, can be a weak link. So next slide. If you have an older door, you would want to look into getting a code approved, Miami-Dade County approved garage door, a new garage door fortified, will hold back the wind. Next slide. And of course, flying debris. We've seen pictures of this for many hurricanes. This was Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Next slide. So it brings up that importance of shuttering our windows. And commonly, plywood is still being used. It's labor intensive, but stronger than plywood would be a metal shutter. And there's many options out there for our consumers to consider in terms of shutter products. Next slide. And tape. We used to all do it, but that was old education. We have new education now, and we know tape does nothing. So just a reminder, don't waste your time with tape because it will not protect your window. Next slide. So you can get a scorecard if you will, think of it that way, and get a wind mitigation inspection for your home to determine what can you do now to strengthen your home in case another storm should come our way. Next slide. And want to mention that the state of Florida has a program right now, My Safe Florida Home. Go to that website. You can learn more about it. And it's an opportunity if you want to mitigate your home, whether it be a garage door, your roof, shutters. It's an opportunity. It's a program where the state of Florida is also offering funding to help your project. But I would advise you to go to that website right away, look at it right away, and because we're don't know how long the project will be funded, and it's been very popular. But but still, it's worth going to that webpage to check out the program. So this is the time to review our hurricane plans as we continue forward in this hurricane season for your family, home, and business, and for any business owners out there, business leadership. Do you have a plan, and do your employees know what that plan is? Next slide. So we want to make sure we have all our supplies ready to go, our food, water, cash, flashlights, batteries. Next slide. And as a reminder, the state will have coming up on this Saturday, the 26th to September 8th, it's the Florida Disaster Preparedness Sales Tax Holiday. So that's a time where you can, if you still want to buy some supplies, to do it during that time frame. Next slide. And of course, generators is something we could maybe buy and use for our home for power. But still, the big safety message is be very careful of generators because of that carbon monoxide gas. Never run that inside a home, always outside the home. And now switching to emergency management. And I wanted to show this because I think most folks have heard of FEMA, but maybe don't understand totally that from FEMA, you go to state emergency management, and then you go to county emergency management, and then to city emergency management. So in your local community, get to know your county emergency management team or your city emergency management team as a team, as a player, as an information resource. Next slide. They do a tremendous job before, during, and after a storm. We have great emergency management here in South Florida. Miami-Dade, you can go to their website and get their hurricane information. Broward County, the same thing, get their hurricane information, their hurricane guide. Next slide. And another tool that we created with the National Hurricane Center, it's a Spanish language hurricane website, huracanes.fiu.edu. And it's just another tool, and for the Spanish speaking community, lots of great information there. Next slide. And we created a 12-part hurricane education video series through the Florida Division of Emergency Management and Museum Discovery and Science. And all of these topics are covered in this 12-part series. It's a great educational tool, all nicely laid out when you go to the webpage. Next slide. So that's it for my presentation. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, for that. I see we've had some comments. Let's see, any questions? Let's see. So here is a comment, and I'm not sure if there was, I see there was an exchange between Ms. Kira and Maria. I'm not sure if you'd want to elaborate a little bit more on that now that we have the floor open for any other comments or questions. So Maria, I leave that to you.
Thank you. And just so everybody understands, Kira was asking about examples from insurance companies that engage in some preemptive action to prevent the need to rebuild an affected area. It is indeed a solution to reducing costs and certainly incentivizing homeowners. And my response was that we know that insurance companies are offering mitigation incentives, which means you may get a discount on your premium if you install, as Eric said, a new garage door. If your roof is newly installed as opposed to a 15-year-old roof, if there are impact windows and doors. Every insurance company is different. The discounts are different as the rates are different. So it's certainly an important way to incentivize homeowners, but we're not talking about the discounts in huge amounts. Let me be clear about that. If you're paying $6,000 for homeowner insurance, which is quite typical for the South Florida area, you won't get it reduced by half. Nowhere near that amount in terms of discounts. Thank you for that question, Kira. I don't have a straightforward answer as in this company is offering that discount, but that's certainly an area that we can explore and provide as information for people who might make it part of their decision what insurance provider to choose. Dr. Frank, did you want to add anything? Dr. Frank had the comment that we don't want to mention that word retreat, and certainly our policymakers don't want to mention it, but it's out of the hands of insurance companies.
I think, yeah, I think that it's fair to say that many decision makers in Florida do not think about the inherent wisdom of rebuilding where it would be wise not to. That issue comes up in the federal flood insurance program a great deal, where 15 to 20% of the policyholders account for a huge proportion of what the federal government pays out because there's consistent rebuilding in coastal areas where there shouldn't be rebuilding. But I think in Florida, it's fair to say that you're not going to have decision makers, especially in county and local governments, give up their most valuable property tax generating properties and say, we won't build here anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see that there was a question from Sarah that Victoria graciously answered. So if you'd like, I will hand off the floor to you. So if you wanted to add on anything or expand.
Sure, just that it is in fact an interesting topic that she points out about migration, but no, the survey does not currently ask if they came from another area or if they would consider moving to another area, but that is definitely a valuable insight, as I feel like some people may say that they would consider moving to another area. And in regards with having a frame of reference, like I mentioned, some people may not have that frame of reference of a previous hurricane if they move from another area.
I'd like to add to that, the people who are in migrating have much higher incomes than the natives.
Yes, we did a policy brief on that and it's on our site.
Sure. So thank you both for that. It looks like there's also another, someone that said more of a question is a concern. The higher the homeowner's insurance rates go up, the more chances for homeowners to drop the insurance altogether, specifically if they already paid their mortgage. So does anyone have any thoughts on that or would want to add, elaborate?
We saw that, yes, indeed, that we had a very large percentage, as I mentioned, of those who stated they would, of homeowners, that they would drop their homeowners insurance. That was 24.2%. if their mortgages were paid off. And this is not surprising in our survey in a year where you see that half of homeowners stated that their homeowners insurance rates increased significantly, 10% or more from the previous year.
I'd like to add to that. It's not even just an issue of whether or not they have insurance. It's also the incredible increase in deductibles for those who are insured. And I think a lot of homeowners do not understand how much they would be on the hook if indeed there was serious damage. That you've had a huge increase in deductibles, and I can tell you from my own experience in a homeowners association, to keep the insurance affordable, we decided to take a policy that would only cover half the damage to the external structure in the event of a named storm. And we're not the only association to take that on. Many have done that just to try to keep insurance affordable. I think, I remember my interior policy used to be a few $100 deductible. And then I think it was $1,000. And now I think it's 2% plus or 3%. Then I think it's gone up even more than that. So it's not even insured versus uninsured. It's also how much are you implicitly self-insuring with even having an insurance policy. And I think there are many owners who probably don't realize what they would be on the hook for if indeed there was serious damage.
All right, does anyone have, so I think let's see, I think there was the questions that we answered, there was a couple of concerns in the chat. I will open it up to anyone else at this time. If you want to add another comment or have any questions for experts, now's the time. Feel free to jump in if anyone has anything to contribute. Let's see, Berthia Howard, go ahead. I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the information. The part about the, Eric, when you mentioned the My Safe Homes Florida, I think, and someone else mentioned a grant, is that also, and I think also, Maria, you mentioned the importance of hardening the home. But is that also what they call the weatherization? Or is that something different? And how can I get that information? Thank you.
It is the same thing, yes. Weatherization, hurricane, home mitigation strategies, home hardening, home strengthening. You can hear different phrases for it, but we're all talking about the same thing. Anything that is done to improve the structure of the home that will prevent it from being damaged either by wind or by flood, right, Eric? We got to consider both of these hazards.
Absolutely. Whatever we can do for the wind and protecting our home and business. But as I mentioned that, that Fort Lauderdale flood event back in April, all of us living in South Florida, anywhere in Florida, and for anyone in any community, just understanding and knowing, do they live in a flood zone? Has their property in the past been flooded? How well does your community, your neighborhood drain? So having flood insurance is so very important. And again, depending on where you live, the rates will change, and that does come into finances on a family budget. And again, to go over the options with your homeowner's insurance agent.
And I see Marion and I both almost simultaneously posted the link to the My Safe Florida Home program that Eric mentioned. This is a program that has been funded. It was funded previously after the 2004-05 hurricane seasons, and now they refunded it again. If you want to participate in it, I would encourage you to submit, to go through the process of submitting, getting an inspection and all of that. I can tell you from prior experience, 15 years ago, the funds ran out within 10 months. So it was well before the timeline given for the program. It is a limited amount of funding, so the sooner you get on that list, the better the chances are that they will be able to fund a portion of your home improvements.
Thank you.
Both for that. And thank you for that question and for bringing up the concern, Berthia. I see we are nearing our limit for the webinar, so I wanted to have a last chance in case anyone had a last minute question or a concern, a comment they wanted to bring up to get some input from our experts on the line. I think, so let's see. So I have a question here. Someone is asking me, and unfortunately, I think this was directed to me, so I will just put this in the chat for everyone to see. I believe the person is asking if it's possible to track number of homeowners selling and leaving Florida due to increased insurance premium. Is there some sort of data available on this?
We don't have such information, but there was a prior question whether we would consider, I think Sarah asked it, we will consider for the next iteration of our hurricane poll to ask it to ask people to tell us if they're considering or they have considered relocating either elsewhere in the state or out of state as a result of rising costs. Thank you for bringing that up, and it gives us a great idea to collect additional data that may inform our decision makers as it speaks to the consequences, right? The impact of rising rates.
Great, and I see that Andres shared their experience with citizens this year. So I thank you for sharing that. But we are also nearing the end of our webinar. So I will just take this chance now to thank you all for joining. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to listen to what our experts have to say on this year's hurricane season update, so to speak, inclusive of climate change, inclusive of migration efforts, inclusive of the insurance prices. So just a reminder that I will be posting the webinar on our YouTube channel, FIU Metropolitan Center. I will also be sharing, I see Victoria shared some snippets of the infographic on her presentation. I will be sharing that on our social media. That will also be available on our website. So that being said, stay tuned. And if you are a fan of our work, just know that it will be out there. So thank you all once more. Thank you to our experts, to our audience for bringing up great concerns, and very much appreciate your patience with our technical difficulties. And that being said, I hope to see you all soon in our next webinar, and you all have a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much.